this is a familiar story. I know that because this is a miracle story that's in all four Gospels. Not all of them make it into all four Gospels, but this one you're going to bump into wherever you turn. The feeding of the 5,000. So what I'm also sure of is that you've heard your share of sermons down the years on the feeding of the 5,000. And you've probably got some fixed ideas. I read and I studied and I thought about what I want to say, and here's where we're going. Three basic points, because that's what they teach you in theological college. 3 points is all you need. So we'll try and stick with 3 points. The story starts with Jesus going to a lonely, deserted place. He's just heard news about John the Baptist's death, fairly violent death at the hands of Herod, and he takes off for a deserted place to get some alone time. What I wanted to check was, how are you at being alone? Are you a person who likes a bit of alone time? You'd rather be on your own? Has COVID-19 been not good to you because you've had more time on your own? Keep all the barbarians at the gate shut away, that sort of thing? How has it been for you? Do you like being alone? In fact, do you crave it? Would you rather be on your own than having all these other people around making noise? Do you fear it? Please, anything but being on my own. I'd rather not do that. Do you embrace it? I can't wait to be on my own. Now let's just take a little poll here. The people who like being on their own, the people who crave company. Yes. It's quite even, maybe a bit more of the alone people. Anybody put up their hands for being alone? If you're sitting near a person who put up your hand for being together, could you just move apart a little bit now? Because you've now discovered that there are some people who need a bit of space. Now let's really do an acid test here. Any couples here where he likes to be alone and she likes to be together, or other way around? Any of those couples here? Alistair's just checking what he's supposed to say. Good plan, Alistair. Don't say the wrong thing until you're told what to say. Jack and Marlene, which is which? Okay. Marlene's alone and you need someone around. Okay. Kepper and Tema, you're deciding on the back there. What do you say? Kepper's alone, and Tema, you need some people around? Okay. Anybody else want to confess? Steve and Judy, what's your family like? Okay. Separated by a computer. Okay. That's how life works in some households. Yes, okay. Do you think your wanting to be alone, or your need to be alone, has changed over the years? Did you at one time want a lot of company, but now you're happy with your own company? Have you seen a shift over the years? Andrew?
Yeah.
Yes?
As a teenager, lots of people.
Yeah, as a teenager, lots of people, party hard, that sort of thing. But now, curl up with a good book? Every time, okay. Mike? So it's the deep and abiding friendships which really make a difference now. Okay. Okay, so a lot of the frivolity and just people bubbling around is not what we need anymore as we get older. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Okay. So yes, again, social distancing might suit some of us in these days and age. In this day and age, we're forced into it, but hey, we get to have time by ourselves. What a good thing! I'm not looking at anybody in particular. It's just a good thing to have time by yourself, isn't it? Have you ever arrived, you're going camping and you arrive and you get the absolute prime location at the campground? You're thrilled because you got there early enough and you pick the spot, it's shady, everything just ticks all the boxes. And then just after you've got your campsite nicely set up, someone arrives and locates themselves just too close to you. There's a whole campground, go over there, but they just sort of come just too close. You know what I'm talking about? Or down the beach, perhaps. You had a good spot all to yourself and someone came and sat just too close. Or at a restaurant, you get a nice table, the one by the window, the view, you've got it all, and the whole restaurant has got empty tables, but the next people to arrive sit right alongside you. Have you ever had it? You know what I'm talking about. And the people who arrive are always noisy. They always, they're never just gentle, quiet people. They're always noisy. Yes. How do you react? How do you react? Some of you have never had this experience, perhaps. So how do you react? Come on. Do you turn to your partner and say, let's get out of here? Let's go somewhere else? No? You think about it, yes. Or do you tough it out? We were here first. Do you join in the fun? The people at the next table at the restaurant turn out to having a birthday party. So you join in, or no? Okay. Anybody here go the route of confronting them? Why would you choose to put your tent up right there, mate? Didn't you see us here? Anybody a confronter? You're all so well behaved. No confronters, okay. Anybody have a reaction of compassion? Oh, well, I guess they needed a night out as well. That's why they're sitting there. I feel sorry. Anybody have a reaction like that? I'm not sure what kind of reaction you people have out there. Not getting much here. I'm giving you a range of choices. Someone, give me something. Margie.
We did have, Jesse just reminded me, we were setting up for a birthday party at Phillies in Adelaide.
Yes.
We were the people too close. We were the people too close. This
You were
lady
the people who sat too close.
This lady, I bumped our chair on the way through or something, and she got really annoyed and got up in a huff and walked out. We had an argument. Yes. Nice.
An argument in Villiers.
Yeah.
Villiers is like the premier pie shop of Adelaide. It's always full of crowd. It was packed. Yes.
Yeah, that was not compassion, it was confrontation.
Confrontation. Okay. Anybody else? Grant suggests you should all try living in an apartment tower with 150 other neighbours, and you'll learn what we're talking about if you weren't sure. Okay? Yes, it's not easy. So we get to today's story. How would Jesus react? How does Jesus deal with crowds? Remember a few stories. Jesus in a crowd, and he stops and says, somebody touched my garment. And his disciples say, there's a big crowd, how can you tell? Remember? Do you remember the story of 4 friends who lower their mate down through the roof because it was so crowded that they wanted to get in to see Jesus? Did Jesus chuck them out? Did he say, I hope you're paying for that? He reacted with compassion. Do you remember his hometown crowd? They weren't too happy about some of the things that he said, and they were going to throw him off the brow of the hill. But he calmly walked through the crowd and went his way. Crowds weren't always friendly for Jesus, that's my point there. Do you remember the Palm Sunday crowd? Cheering. It would have been good to stop at Palm Sunday. But that's not the crowd, that's not the only crowd story that we get. A week later, they're baying for his blood. What I do see, though, in these encounters is that Jesus had compassion. And that's the word that we get in the reading this morning. When he goes to a deserted place, gets out of the boat, and there's a crowd there, he looks at them and has compassion. Compassion comes from the Greek word which has something to do with your innards. It's a gut reaction. Jesus looks at the crowd and has a gut reaction. He's moved with pity in another version, another gospel version of this. He has compassion on the crowd. He healed the sick. In fact, you could stop the story there. Jesus has come away to a quiet place to have some alone time, and he gets out of the boat and there's a crowd. He has compassion and he healed their sick. Full stop. There's a good story. That would be enough. Jesus has compassion and he heals the sick. There are a number of stories in the Gospels like that. How do the disciples react to the crowds? Send them away. We might have a riot because they're hungry. Nothing worse than a hungry crowd. Nothing worse than a hungry wife who needs feeding. I can tell you about that, but that's another day. The disciples say, we want some alone time with our teacher. We want to be together and have a spiritual moment. This could be our spiritual high point. A bit of time with Jesus. That's how the disciples seem to be reacting. And of course, all of this gospel story and all of the things we do always bounce into us and our response. If we were in the group of disciples that day, as we're in the group of disciples today, what would we be saying to Jesus? Not now, Jesus. We're in worship. We're busy. We want a spiritual high point. Don't interrupt us and remind us of the crowds who are hungry. We just want to be with you and have a focused time with you. Jesus keeps breaking into our lives and saying, compassion doesn't end at the door. There's more for us to see and do. Yes, there's a danger in going to lonely, deserted places. There's even a danger when you're on your own. You'll think wild, radical thoughts. So be careful when you're on your own. Point number 2. Jesus says to the disciples, when it comes time to feeding this crowd, you give them something to eat. Now, I've often wondered, why doesn't Jesus just fix it? He must know exactly what's going on. There's 5,000 people on the hillside. He must know that they're hungry, that they have needs. Why doesn't he just wave a magic wand and say, everybody who was hungry, you're now no longer hungry? Or everybody who's hungry, wave your wand, look in your bags, oh, it's a miracle, there's a sandwich there for you. Wouldn't that be good? Why go through this whole process if he knows that there's such little amount of food? 5 loaves, 2 fish. We know the story. Why go through this whole thing? If the point is to feed the crowd, there would have been more efficient ways to do it. So what's Jesus trying to teach the disciples? When someone says they've got 5 barley loaves, the food of the poor, not the good stuff, 5 barley loaves and 2 fish from that region which are small, not swordfish or tuna or something crowd feeding, but tiny little fish. What's Jesus on about? What's he trying to teach the disciples? And here it comes to me that there are basically 2 lessons for the disciples. Bring what you have, do what you can. Bring what you have. Look, we've only got 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. There is a crowd that would fill TIO Stadium. I calculated that during the week just to check the numbers. There is a big crowd. And that's the food we've got. Bring what you have. Do what you can. In India, I don't know if I've told you this story, but I was in India one time at a little mission hospital. And we're in the chapel of this little mission hospital. And there was a memorial plaque to a woman who'd served, probably from the UK or something. And it told the woman's name, the date of birth, the date of death. And then the Bible verse that it had was, she did what she could. The verse about the woman who anointed Jesus' feet. Leave her alone. She's done a beautiful thing. She did what she could. She did what she could. I reckon that'd be good words to have on your tombstone, actually. I'm not wishing anyone rushing to a tombstone, but it would be all right. Andrew Williams, he did what he could. That's actually high praise. It wasn't much. You don't think it's high enough? We didn't do enough? I don't know. It works for me. Bring what you have. The resources are hopelessly inadequate. And do what you can. And you get remembered by Jesus. She did what she could. Our resources in the church are always limited. I found a story this week about the founder of Habitat for Humanity. Look, I read so many things. I can't even remember the guy's name. Someone else will tell me after this. Habitat for Humanity. And one group wanted to start their own little chapter in their city. And the guy, the founder, was coming through and they were talking to him. And one of the people in this group that was about to start, they caught the idea of Habitat for Humanity. They said to him, look, how much money should we have if we want to start a Habitat for Humanity group? And this guy, the founder of Habitat for Humanity, said, well, you absolutely must, it would be irresponsible without it, to make sure that definitely you had at least $1 in the bank. I think it's a good response. Bring what you have, do what you can. I have a friend in Sydney, his name is Bill Cruz. Anybody recognise that name, Bill Cruz? He's actually been on the list of one of Australia's living treasures. And Bill Cruz is quite a character. He runs this, he's a minister, he runs a church and has a little restaurant that they run during the week called Loaves and Fishes. How appropriate. And with that, he feeds whoever comes around, and of course it grows and grows and grows, and they feed thousands. Their Christmas Day lunch is legendary in Sydney. They just feed thousands. How do they get the food? How do they have all the food that they need to feed all these people? I have no idea. And I don't think he does either. His resources were hopelessly inadequate when he began, but now he's grown this amazing ministry of feeding people in Ashfield in Sydney. So the lesson there is never enough. There is always plenty. There's never enough. There's always plenty. So how do we use our resources? Sparingly, generously, selflessly. Yes, it's terrible hard work. And especially, I'm still reeling from last week's service with all the people telling about life during the different decades and what wonderful ministers we had in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And, tough acts to follow, all those ministers. How do we use our resources? Generously? Selflessly? Or do we think, no, we just haven't got enough? What could we possibly do? in this story, the disciples take the little that they have, the hopelessly inadequate amount, they bring it to Jesus, who blesses it, breaks it, and gives it back to the disciples. Giving it back to the disciples reminds me that we disciples are always needed in Jesus' work. Jesus doesn't wave a magic wand and fix the problem. He takes the meagre, pitiful resources that we have and blesses them and breaks them and gives it back to us and says, you yourselves give them something to eat. You remember that old prayer of Saint Teresa of Avila? God has no hands but our hands, no feet but our feet, that prayer. We're the ones that Jesus gives the resources back to. Apparently he needs us in this task of feeding the world. Sometimes this story is called a sharing miracle. When people see that someone begins to share their food, or maybe it's just the disciples, the rest of the crowd catches on, oh, we'd better all share our food. And so a popular interpretation has been that this is the miracle here, is that everybody began to share. Okay, it's a good theory. That's how you get all this food coming out of the bags and the knapsacks that people are carrying. Could be. I've decided I don't believe that anymore. I've preached that and told people about it, but I'm not sure I believe it anymore. I think this is a genuine miracle. All four Gospels record it. That in itself is unusual. It must have had a dramatic effect on the disciples and the people of Jesus' day, that they had seen something that they couldn't explain or begin to understand, and yet everybody got fed. If it had just been about we all opened our cases and shared stuff, I don't think it would have survived as a story in all the Gospels and down the years for 2,000 years. Number 3. There are about 5,000 men in the crowd, besides women and children. 5,000 men. It says that in the text, and doesn't tell us how many were in the crowd. So we've always called this the feeding of the 5,000. My question there is, how do we count? And who do we count? Perhaps in this crowd it was one of those places where you had separate areas for the men and for the women and for the children, something like that. And so when they did the counting, they got to 5,000 after counting the men and said, that's enough, it's a big crowd. We know now, something. It could have been that it was a segregated group, we don't know. But the question for us is, how do we count? Who's in, who's out? It was only in 1967 that Indigenous people got counted in this country. Prior to that, they'd been on the flora and fauna list. 1967. Some people work for a living in this congregation counting things. The Bureau, Australian, ABS, Australian Bureau, ABS. Sue, who's not here, Andrew, they're good at counting stuff. Who do we count? Who's in, who's out? Interesting counting. And I've been fascinated, of course, as you all have, with the COVID story and what we've seen there and what we discovered there. Apparently it's not apples and apples when it comes to counting deaths, and some countries have counted these people as COVID deaths and some haven't. And so you get disparities in what countries have had what death rates. Of course, you've got one leader who suggests that if you test less people, you'll have less deaths. Not much evidence that that is a good strategy, as far as I can tell. Others who've suggested, hey, it's only old people that are dying. You do with a few less old people. There's all these kind of things. Who counts in our society? Who do we count and who counts? Who matters? Who doesn't matter? In the prayer of confession this morning, we said a beautiful prayer. You can go back and find it later or look at it or think about it. We confess that we hoard, we hold things to ourselves, even our compassion. Who do we count? We've excluded some people. Yeah. We've excluded some people. On Thursday night in our Bible study, I then asked the question, when did you last need a special feed from Jesus? And how did he meet your need? I'll ask the same question here. When did you last get or need a special feed from Jesus? And how did he meet your need? Think about that for a moment. If Jesus was to feed you this week, what would he need to give you? Would it be some comfort food of some kind? Would it be a rich spiritual meal? Would it be, sorry, this tea towel's a bit dirty, but you might be able to see the message. If you can't, I'll read it to you. So there's a woman chomping on something, and it says, discovering that chocolate has low GI and is high in antioxidant awakens Cecily's interest in health foods. Yes. It might be some comfort food that you need. It might be some rich spiritual food that you need this week. May Jesus this week, in his feeding of your thankful heart, awaken in you an interest in all things spiritual and assure you of God's love and care of you in the coming week. And in this knowledge and power, may you live your best and fullest